We're all taught that the European Enlightenment was this huge spark that created modern thought. But what if that's only one piece of the puzzle? What if I told you that Africa's own intellectual awakening isn't just going to be a sequel, it's going to be a whole different story, built on its very own, very ancient foundations? Okay, so let's just dive right in with a big question. It's one that for most of us seems like a total no-brainer. The Enlightenment led to modern science, right? It feels like a straight line. But is it really that simple? Well, when you actually dig into the history, the honest-to-goodness answer is a pretty solid no. And that simple no just blows the doors wide open to a much more complicated and way more interesting story about where modern science actually came from. Now, hold on. This isn't about trying to dismiss the Enlightenment or say it wasn't a huge deal. It absolutely was. The argument here is that its role has been kind of misunderstood. It wasn't the match that lit the fire, it was more like the giant fan that turned a glowing ember into a raging inferno. This quote really just nails it. Think about it. The Enlightenment was this incredible accelerant. It took all these amazing ideas that were already there and spread them like wildfire. But you can't give all the credit for the fire to the person who just showed up and fanned the flames. So, that begs the question, right? If the Enlightenment was just fanning the flames, what was the actual fire? What was the real engine driving this brand new way of thinking about the world? Well, it was the incredible period that came right before it. That engine was the scientific revolution, and it was built on these four absolutely massive pillars. First, Europeans rediscovered the work of the ancient Greeks. Second, you had these insane tech breakthroughs, like the telescope. Third, a huge cultural shift towards proving things by actually observing them. And fourth, the idea that math was the language the universe was written in. And this was the era of the heavy hitters, We're talking about Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and of course Newton. These are the absolute giants who built the engine of modern science long before the Enlightenment philosophers even came onto the scene. So you see, the Enlightenment comes along after the scientific revolution had already done the heavy lifting. It took that powerful, humming engine of science and basically put it on the superhighway, making it popular, accessible, and a part of mainstream culture. But let's rewind for a second. If we look back at that very first pillar of the scientific revolution, the rediscovery of Greek texts, we find this glaring silence in the standard story. And it leads to a pretty uncomfortable question. Here's the thing. The Greeks themselves were pretty open about where they got their ideas. Historical records, even from guys like Herodotus, the father of history, tell us that the greatest Greek minds, Pythagoras, Plato, all traveled to Kemet, which is ancient Egypt, to study. So the roots of what we call Western thought were actually watered in African soil. Which leads us to this massive, unavoidable question. If African knowledge was so fundamental to the Greeks, then where is it? Where are the libraries? Where are the original texts that inspired the so-called fathers of Western philosophy and science? And the answer is, frankly, pretty chilling. Those vast libraries, those storehouses of knowledge in astronomy, medicine, math, they were systematically destroyed, burned, lost, erased, all to build a new story, a colonial narrative that needed the birthplace of reason to be in Europe, and only Europe. That deliberate erasure forces us to look differently at what was left behind. Because what if the things that were dismissed as just myth or superstition were actually something else entirely? What if they were complex systems of knowledge, just hiding in plain sight as folklore? I mean, think about this for a second. The Dogon people in Mali had knowledge of the star Sirius B, a star you literally cannot see without a powerful telescope, for centuries before modern astronomers confirmed it was there. Was that just superstition? Or was it a highly sophisticated data set that we just haven't figured out how to read yet? And we can ask that same question about so many other things. What if the geometry that built the pyramids, or the incredibly complex ethical system in Ifa cosmology, what if they aren't just artifacts? What if they're untapped systems of thought, entire data sets just waiting for us to analyze them with modern tools? So here's the big takeaway. This is not about rejecting modern science or trying to turn back the clock. Not at all. It's about forging a completely new path forward, one that doesn't just copy Europe's journey, but instead builds upon Africa's own incredibly rich and deep intellectual foundations. So what could that actually look like? Well, just imagine an education system that treats its own intellectual heritage with the same respect and rigor that the West gives to the Greek classics, not as a replacement for calculus or physics, but as a powerful parallel stream of knowledge.
taught right alongside them. And ultimately, this is about a massive shift in perspective. It's a declaration that all of this knowledge, it isn't just some interesting little footnote in Europe's story. No, it is a foundational chapter in the entire story of human thought.
And that really leaves us with this final, powerful idea. The path forward isn't about importing an awakening from somewhere else. It's about recognizing that the sun is already rising on a brand new day, a day built on a uniquely African foundation. The groundwork is all there. Now it's just time to start building.